Hey there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation from equipping to empowering. We are taking a look at a survey that we did this year uh, where we just basically dived in to figure out what's going on with women in the church when it comes to equipping and empowering. I'm Carrie Williams. I'm the executive director of Exponential Next. And like I said, I'm really glad that you're joining us today. I have a lot of friends with me here, but first, I just want to give a little bit of background and context to myself. So, not only do I work with Exponential under the Exponential Next umbrella, I am also a church planter. So, a handful of years ago, I was part of a very tiny team, part of the leadership team that launched the Church of 1122. And I have about 4 or 5 churches that I've been on staff at over the years. And so this is a near and dear conversation to my heart. Now I'm going to ask my friends to introduce themselves. We've got a plethora of knowledge and wisdom, but they're also my dear friends who are joining us today. Raj, Sue, John, and Jamie, can you guys please introduce yourselves?
Thanks, Carrie. I'm Raj Pillai. I serve as Vice President, Chief of Staff here at Exponential. I grew up at a church that was planted by a Canadian missionary couple that went from Winnipeg, Manitoba to Calcutta, India, and planted a church. And that one church, over the course of the next 30, 40 years, went on to plant over 400 churches all over Eastern India. So I grew up in a church planting context. And, being at Exponential now in my second year, it feels like I'm back in my tribe. Um, I'm the lucky husband of Erica and the proud dad of 4 remarkable daughters. So this topic is of great interest to me and our family.
That's great. Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Ferguson, along with my husband Dave, my brother-in-law John, who's also on the webinar with us today, and a bunch of other people. I helped to plant Community Christian Church in the Chicagoland area. I held a number of different roles there through the years. And currently, I am the co-director of Exponential Women Next, where we are looking for ways to encourage, empower, and equip women that are currently leading, and then also that next generation of women leaders. So it's going to be an important conversation today.
Everybody, great to be with you. Sue told you a little bit about me already, but greetings from Chicago. I'm co-founding pastor of Community Christian Church in Chicagoland, lead visionary for Chicagoland Church Planting Collective, and now on the Exponential team as the City Catalyst. And just excited to be with you. Married to my wife for over 35 years, and I have 2 adult children, a daughter and a son. Thanks for joining us today. It's going to be a great discussion.
And I'm Jami Ruth. I'm the communications director at Exponential. And I worked for 21 years for a church called Granger Community Church in the South Bend, Indiana area, and had the privilege to sit on the leadership team and be a part of that faith community, which our founding pastor was still the pastor until he passed away a few years ago. So we still had very much a church planting mindset. So welcome.
Yeah. So, in this survey, I just want to point out that we had over 250 women who are actively in vocational ministry around the nation in different contexts, different networks and denominations, different church sizes, and all kinds of ages from 18 to over 65. And our goal within this, like I mentioned, was to discover how women are feeling when it comes to being equipped versus empowered, and just the comparison along the way and what kind of things are contributing to both of those feelings, whether they feel equipped or feel empowered or not equipped or not empowered. And together, we're going to do a deep dive around the top 10 summarized findings that we found in this survey. And we're going to start with equipping. So I'm going to just review from a high level what we mean when we say equipped. So if we can scroll on through to the equipped, yeah, there we go. So you can see that the percentage of women who felt equipped that took this survey was 52% versus 48 who did not feel equipped. Women feeling that they've been intentionally developed through resources, training, coaching, or mentorship by their church for ministry leadership. So only 52%. And you're going to see this woven throughout all of the results where we are kind of in the middle ground. We don't quite ever make it over that middle space along the way when we talk about these conversations. And so we are going to start with the first bullet point that that summarizes why women feel equipped versus not equipped. So if you can go ahead, Andy, to the next. Thanks so much.
Yeah, all right. Carrie, you want me to take it from here?
Yep. Thanks,
All
John.
right. Yeah, for sure. And you can follow along by looking at the slide there where it says role of personal initiative. And what we found here is that many women report that equipping often depends heavily on their own initiative. And some of the ways that were cited were education, pursuing that independently, finding mentors outside the local church. And it seems to highlight sort of a systemic gap where churches often fail to proactively invest in or design structured sort of equipping pathways specifically for women. Couple of reflections on that. I would say a couple of things. I think we'd all agree that personal initiative is important. We have to advocate for ourselves when it comes to leadership. But on the other hand, churches need to put systems and structures in place that give women clear opportunities and pathways to be developed in their leadership. Just to reflect for a couple of minutes on our experience at Community Christian Church here in Chicago, where we made plenty of mistakes. But I would say early on that we benefited from having a few systems in place that were vital to developing female leaders. And when one was apprenticeship, we encouraged every leader to identify an apprentice, and that would be someone he or she was equipping to eventually lead. And so I think women knew that if they wanted to be further developed as a leader, they could inquire about becoming an apprentice leader. So that would be one system. The second system that I think was also helpful in developing women in leadership was what we called leadership community. And these were gatherings mostly monthly where we would bring together leaders, apprentice leaders, and those even aspiring to become leaders for ongoing vision casting, equipping, and times of encouragement and accountability in their leadership. A third would be our leadership pathway. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I call these systems because they really were a key part of our strategy for leadership development. We talked about them, made them public, and they were available to both men and women.
Thank you, John. That's really helpful. We're going to dive into number 2, mentorship importance. And so here's what I'm going to say about this as we dive into this. Mentorship, coaching, personal investment was the number one thing that we heard across the board from women that they desired and needed the most, and the number one thing that was also lacking the most. So, Jami, what do you think?
When we were talking about this together as a group, I had been a part of a church that definitely valued women in all forms of leadership, but we definitely had systems and processes in place to help protect each other. And so and not right or wrong, but the church I came from, we had rules like men and women didn't go to lunch together or ride in cars together. And so sometimes as a female, when you're in an environment like this, it may make it harder than to have that personal mentor that we talk about in this section. And so one of the things that we were super intentional about is just bringing along another person. And so one example is our lead pastor would still mentor me, but bring along an additional person that was younger that could learn from this experience. And it was super helpful. Another example is we had a worship leader where that team was predominantly men. And so in order for her to be mentored, I would go to lunch with her supervisor and help actually pour into her as well and mentor her. And so this is just an example of this mentorship being so important, but regardless of where we fall theologically, we can still be super intentional about providing mentorship, but honoring any personal convictions that we might have.
That's good, Jami. Some of my personal experience around this topic also created a little bit of challenge. When we first started the Church of 1122, my number one goal was to find a female that was about 10 years ahead of me in vocational ministry that sat on an executive team like I was sitting on. And my elders actually did the due diligence to try to help me find someone. And we couldn't find anyone. And so at the end of that process, I went to the chairman of our board of elders and I asked him to mentor me specifically. And he prayed about it and came back and said, absolutely, I will mentor you. And so for a year and a half, we met every single week. And he was the person who poured into me and coached me and mentored me in that environment. So some key notes here. If you are one of those types of leaders that you know others would love to learn from, don't forget about the women. If you are in an environment where you want to just use the kind of due diligence and caution, meet behind open doors, invite another female to join you who might be 5 years ahead of that woman, who then also could join in the mentorship process. And if you're a woman in one of those environments where it seems a little bit harder to find somebody to mentor you, don't be afraid to ask. So let's move on to the third one. I'm going to read this: resource and time constraints. Many women note balancing ministry roles with work, family, and personal energy limits significantly influences their ability to pursue equipping opportunities. I think all the women who are represented on this webinar would all say yes and amen. We have some unique challenges that might not pertain to men, at least on the level that it hits at home with a woman. I experienced this as being a woman in full-time vocational ministry over the years. And the first thing that I want to say, I've heard over the years that, you have to learn how to balance everything. I think balance is a myth. It actually is not a reality when it comes to just even normal life. You take out the factor of being in vocational ministry, even out of that, and balance is still a myth. It doesn't matter what you're doing as a wife or a mom. Typically, there is no such thing as balance. There are seasons where you're giving your best and your all, and sometimes your best and your all looks like minimal in all avenues. And, around my house, we say family first. And so I know, Jami, you've got some thoughts on this. As you and I both raised small kids in the context of being on a church staff full time. And Jami and I had a discussion even recently about that we had both made the decision that we would be home to either pick up our kids or meet them at the bus stop after school. And that was a non-negotiable. Jami, talk more about that.
Yeah, I've always loved to work. I'm wired to work. That's fun for me. But when you have kids, as a mom, you have that tension of either you have mom guilt sometimes or you have work guilt sometimes, because it is that what Carrie said, balance isn't real. And so we in our home put together some things that were non-negotiables for us. And for me, that was to make sure I was home after school. And sometimes we shared it. It's not meant to be legalistic, but to be home after school when the bus came, because those kids had so much to talk about when they jumped off the bus, and I didn't want to miss that time. But as leading leaders and leading a team, I think if we're committed to actually mentoring women and equipping and empowering women, we have to allow some of that flexibility in our work schedules so that we can bring our full selves when we're working, but also help working moms feel like they aren't cheating their family because they also are wired and want to work. And so just looking for opportunities to give flexibility. And I know as times have changed, there's guys who would like that flexibility at times too, to be able to do those things. But when we have a strict, rigid schedule that doesn't allow for flexibility, we immediately alienate a lot of high capacity female leaders, because they're trying to be a great mom, but also bring their best to ministry as well. So,
thanks, Jami. I think specifically women listening, or men with a wife who potentially could be in any kind of position of working, identify with that. Let's go on to point number 4 of our findings when it came to being equipped. And I'm going to ask Raj if you'll just, will you read that for us? And you and Jon just give us some insight around this one.
Yeah, happy to. Before I go to that, just one other quick thing, a thought that was triggered by the conversation, the last point. One of the things I've done over the years is read books by female leaders And I recently read a book called My Life in Full by Indra Nooyi, who was the first female CEO of PepsiCo. And there's actually 2 whole chapters where she writes about this constant tension of trying to lead a Fortune 50 company along with being there for her kids. And this tension, and she raises the whole issue of, quality childcare for female leaders. So that's a tension. I think it's very real. But thanks for bringing that up. Number 4, negative impact of ambiguous or low visibility equipping. In some churches, equipping does not clearly translate into meaningful growth or leadership opportunity. Some women feel equipped only to become frustrated by the absence of visible pathways or recognition to utilize their training fully. John, you want to give an example and then I'll jump in?
Yeah, I can give an example of a leader who made it very easy. We had a leader at our church, Janet McMahon. Some of you might know Janet. She's in Kansas City now. But I worked with Janet for a number of years, and I think she's a great example, Raj, of someone who started out as a small group apprentice leader. So she experienced apprenticeship that I talked about earlier. She participated fully in our leadership community gatherings. I mentioned those earlier. And then she also walked what we called our leadership pathway from apprentice leader to leader, to coach, to staff director, and eventually to church planter or pastor. So Janet walked that path. And in addition, Janet and I met together regularly, strategized, worked on ministry plans, and would discuss her development on an ongoing basis. She played a variety of roles in our staff, from children's ministry to adult small group ministry, before she and Troy eventually left to start Restore Community Church in Kansas City, which, if you know anything about that story, that church eventually started a number of church planting networks. And I think they've now helped start, over 40 churches in Kansas City over the past 10 plus years. So I think Janet's a great example of someone who, kind of walked that path, took the initiative, but was also given opportunities and walked that leadership path.
Thanks, John. Yeah, several examples come to mind on this for me, but many of the ones that I can think of actually happened early on in my life. My leadership was so shaped by the missionary couple that started the church I grew up in, Mark and Hulda Buntain. And Hulda Buntain was my first boss. So I was 21 years old. She called me into her office and she said, I see God's hand upon you. You're going to be working for me. That was my call to ministry. It was Hulda Buntain telling me, you're working for me. And just working closely with her and seeing, what she would do is she would just invite people in. She would be having meetings and she would say, I want you to come with me. So one time she had a meeting with Mother Teresa and they were going to talk about some major strategic initiatives for the city of Calcutta. And so she's going there and she's going with another senior leader and she sees me, she pops into my office and says, I'm 21 years old. And she says, Raj, I want you to come with us. And so the 3 of us go. So here's Hulda Buntain and Mother Teresa having a conversation. And I'm sitting there listening and she's asking me, what do you think? I'm like, and I'm fumbling for words because these are 2 amazing leaders. But she taught me the value of invitational questions. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned about leadership is how do I engage people by just asking them questions? What do you think about this? Do you have any ideas on this? How would you approach this? Those are some ways we can bring clarity in situations where we can equip people from all backgrounds.
That's so good, guys. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're not going to do too much diving deep into point number 5 here. You can read through it yourselves, but one thing that I wanted to highlight is that we're here to support all women, no matter of the theological background or stance in which they come from or are part of or what they believe. We believe thoroughly in equipping all women into the fullness of God for their lives, for the sake of them, for their neighborhoods, for their families, for their churches, for their cities. And so we think it's really important that folks recognize and know that exponential, we don't stand in any kind of theological space or place when it comes to this. We are here to equip all women and empower all women for the sake of the gospel. John, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, Carrie, thanks for bringing that up, because I think when we talk about egalitarian and complementarian views, it can sound almost like 2 sort of binary camps. And And I think it's better understood as a continuum with a range of perspectives and practices. And that's not to minimize theological convictions. I just think it's framing it up in a way that sort of helps us avoid oversimplification and helps us recognize nuance and appreciate that many churches kind of, live somewhere in between rather than opposite ends. And if I could just go back to, like, we've already heard, you look at Jami's experience in an interesting church culture, right? You look at Raj's experience in a completely different culture, but yet development and equipping was still happening. And I think, Jami, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from what I've heard you say, you felt fully equipped and fully empowered in that context. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, and I'll just echo that, John. I've sat in churches on leadership that were in the from one spectrum to the other, and I experienced complete equipping and complete empowering no matter the context that I have served in. And so I know it's possible in all. And I know that firsthand. I'm a product of that. All right, let's shift to empowerment. So, one thing here you're going to see that just flew by us really quickly on the screen is that when it came to equipping and the age ranges that took this survey, it was everybody from 18 to over 65. It was pretty much straight down the middle. We didn't have any drastic change in results based on the female's age who took the survey. And so it's basically straight down the middle, whether it was a 20-year-old or a 70-year-old, they pretty much feel the same when it comes to being equipped. And I'll say that the same was true for the empowerment portion. So in the empowerment side of things, it was right about down the center as well when it comes to empowering. And empowering, just so that you guys know the difference of what we're trying to hone into here. Equipping is that intentional disciple making, leadership development, equipping someone to do a job, to accomplish a role, while empowerment is actually giving the space and the permission and loosening of the reins for the person to actually do the thing. And so that would be the difference. And now we're going to jump into the top 5 findings that we found under equipping. Andy, if you'll roll back to equipping number 1. Keep going back a little bit more, Andy. Back one more. Actually, you're going to empowerment. Yep, there you are. So 44% of women felt empowered, while 56% did not, which means 44% of women who took this survey feel like they're given the permission, a voice, opportunity, or explicit support to use their gifts and leadership within the church. 56% of women who took this survey do not feel like they are empowered, and they felt excluded from leadership, undervalued, restricted, or only allowed to do certain roles, meaning that they felt like they had some type of lid on them. So let's jump into the number 1 bullet point when it comes to women feeling empowered versus not empowered. Jami, would you review number 1 for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So many women report that equipping often depends heavily on their own initiative, like pursuing education independently or finding mentors outside the church. This highlights a systematic gap where churches often fail to proactively invest or design a structure equipping pathways specifically for women. I was, like I said, a part of a local church for 21 years, and God gave me leaders who were super intentional about making sure that that I'll just speak to my own personal example, that I was invited into tables and spaces that didn't make sense from my experience, my age, any of that. And I was empowered to actually take key initiatives and run with them and lead those. And I just remember at times thinking, I'm 27 years old. I can't believe I'm trusted to lead this. And it wasn't just in words, but it was in it actually was empowered to do it. And I was allowed to try things. And sometimes I failed. And sometimes I did awesome. But I was constantly encouraged to do that and asked to be part of the process. And I think the leaders that I had for years, and is how I modeled my leadership in the last 10 years, is how do we make sure that we're constantly bringing somebody up with us? It's what Dave and John talk about, like this apprenticeship idea of like, who can come with me? It's not the most efficient, right? But it's the most effective when I can bring somebody along with me that they get to be exposed and be a part of something. And I actually empower them to lead. And when they first start, they may not do it as well as I do it, but eventually they probably are going to do it better than I do it. And it's so much more fun to be in collaboration on mission together as a team than to be a lid in leadership. And so that's just some examples I had, and I'm grateful for pastors and leaders who went before me and created that culture that I can continue that today.
Yeah, thank you, Jami. And I think we may have read the wrong caption on the last one, but
Oh,
so
sorry.
that's okay.
Um,
We can catch up. It's empowerment gaps despite equipping, and so you can review that on your own
Sure.
as we move forward. But number two, we're going to talk about barriers identified by women. So these are the barriers that came up in the survey. Sue, would you mind dipping into this one for us?
Happy to do that. The first point says internal barriers such as insecurity about assertiveness or leadership style are common, often exasperated by lack of encouragement or coaching. External barriers include theological restrictions, unconscious bias, male dominated leadership dynamics, unclear leadership pathways, and limited visibility for leadership roles. And the third point was that some women experience ageism, family role expectations, or racial or ethnic barriers layered over the gender-based obstacles. And I would say I can totally relate to several of these things, but starting with the internal barriers. At the age of 25, I was asked to consider taking a staff role at the church I was attending at the time. I had been working with the youth. The senior pastor came to me and said, "Hey, our youth pastor is stepping down. Would you consider taking this role?" And immediately I just disqualified myself. So I threw up internal barriers, saying things to myself like, "Hey, you didn't go to Bible college or a Christian college. You're not qualified to do this. You don't have the training necessary." So I just was like, yeah, I didn't even say I'd pray about it. I was just like, oh no, that is just no way. I would also say there was probably an external barrier that played into that, because in that church that I was attending, I did not see any women in paid staff leadership roles. And so there was no example for me to go like, oh, I could do this because she did this. So, I think I just was like, oh no, I have a teaching degree. This is my lane. Church leadership is not going to be, for me. Fast forward then 25 years, and I have held a number of different roles at Community, our church, and someone came to me asking me to take a paid role, and I, at that point, did a little bit of that self-talk again of like, oh, I don't know if I'm qualified for that. That's a little bit of that imposter syndrome. I think that women are prone to, like, I don't really have what it takes. I think there's some statistics out there that show, men can feel 50% qualified and be like, yeah, I could do this. And women need to feel 95% qualified. So I do think I did some of that self-talk again, but I had people in my life I could turn to, women leaders, that I could say, hey, do you think I could do this role? And those women, and I would say some men as well that I had been leading alongside, were able to say, Sue, you're already doing all the things. You definitely can take this role. And so I do think those barriers are real. I've experienced those.
Yeah, and Sue, I think this is probably one of the more common things that I hear when I have conversations with other females across, specifically in the United States, and are about these types of barriers that exist. I'll hear from the one side of the woman who thinks that they don't have the chops to do whatever it is that's in front of them. And so they will just automatically back down from doing it. Or number two, they find themselves at a table full of men. I can attest to this. I have been in rooms where there have been, 400 men and 2 women. I've been on Zoom calls where there have been 20 men and me. And so it unfortunately right now it is the norm. And so here's what I would say about those barriers. I would say number one, if you are in a position of leadership, specifically if you're a man, ask questions to those women to ask if things are clear for them. Ask for their input on are these opportunities clear? Is the ask that I'm asking you clear? Is the opportunity that is presented to you or that we're presenting as an open opportunity clear? And women, I would say give yourselves permission to ask questions, to do the due diligence of ask the hard questions along the way of, hey, should I be considered for XYZ? Hey, do you think that I have what it takes? And I would say surrounding yourself with trusted men and women who can speak into your life honestly is really key and important because, ladies, we need you on the front line. We need you saying yes to the hard things. And if there are real barriers, talk to your leaders about those. If they're barriers that you're creating that actually are invisible, that actually might not even exist, that's a good space to invite others to speak into you as an individual, recognizing that it might be that imposter syndrome, which, by the way, every man and woman go through at some point, or at least over and over and over again in my story.
Hey, Carrie, can I ask a quick question? Is it all right?
Sure.
I'd be curious to hear from you or Sue or Jamie, when you've been the 2 or 3 women in a room of 50 or 100 men, what sort of encouragement was helpful from the other men to keep you in the mix?
For me, I was invited into those spaces by men.
Mhm.
And for me, that validated me being in that space. I will say it didn't mean that I didn't struggle when sitting in those spaces and recognizing that I was the only woman in the space. But it did give me the confidence and the ability to stay and be present because it was men who invited me into the space to begin with, which was really helpful. Jamie or Sue, do you have anything you want to add?
I would
I
agree.
th-
Oh, go ahead, Sue.
Go ahead, Jamie.
I would agree with that. And I think to take it a step further, because I worked at the church for 21 years, pre-church, I worked in the RV industry, which is a predominantly male industry as well. And I think not just to have a seat at the table, but to actually be asked to contribute, to have voice, and for it to be considered, not just I'm not in the room to take notes for the guys who are having the conversation, but Jamie, what do you think? And I think that matters just not for men and females, but even for young leaders. For somebody who's really young to have that opportunity to speak into something, it gives confidence over time, and you build trust over time when you actually say, no, we value your contribution, your voice to the space. And so for me, that's what was helpful.
I think it's the same, and I think it depends to personality. As John can attest, I'm sort of assertive. I might not wait for you to ask what I think. I may just jump in and tell you what I think. That's my personality. But I know a lot of other women leaders who are going to show up less assertive, less secure, and just like in good small group facilitation, we look around the room and we go, who's not contributing? Let me draw them into this conversation. We do that in staff meetings, in team meetings, whatever it is. Invite those people who aren't speaking to have a voice and to share their thoughts. So I think once that's happened a few times, they're going to be much more likely to feel like, oh, it's okay for me to jump in and share my thoughts on this. We need both voices. If we're going to fully represent the image of God, we need men and women speaking into the different situations that arise.
That's good, Sue. That's one thing that we didn't mention. Statistics and studies show that women are less likely to speak up when they're invited to a table. They will typically only speak up if they're specifically asked a question. And so, John, for the men listening, and even the other females who are more like Sue and myself, who are a little more on the assertive side and don't wait to be asked, the majority will wait to be asked a question. And so, knowing that, making sure that you're being inclusive of them, just like you would an introvert in an environment, it's all about the intentionality behind it. And so, as I mentioned, statistics show women are less likely to speak up. So imagine a woman sitting at a table of 12 men, how much even more so are they going to shrink back when they have so much value to add and insight to add and color to bring to the conversation, and they're holding back. So inviting them, asking them questions is always really, really helpful. Let's move on to number 3. Raj, will you read number 3 for us?
Yeah. Significance of supportive leadership. Respondents consistently highlight stories where supportive male and female leaders who affirm women's gifts and offer invitations to lead create transformational empowerment experiences. Conversely, a lack of clear public affirmation or symbolic gestures without real power sharing leads to frustration and disillusionment.
Thanks, Raj. This is a big one for me because as a woman who has sat in different executive leadership roles in churches, I've always been surrounded by men who were extremely supportive, and women. So when I was an 18-year-old, really green, had some natural leadership gifts, but really rough around the edges, my youth pastor, who was a man, put me in places and spaces of leadership roles that stretched and challenged me. And he was extremely supportive in that. And his wife, who was also a type A, very driven, very vocal female, also got behind me and supported me really well. And then you fast forward all the way to the organization we're in right now at Exponential. I know that we're not a church technically, but I feel fully supported by any of the male and female leaders within our organization. I could say the same thing at the Church of 1122. Joby Martin is one of my best friends, but he was also extremely empowering of me and supportive of me in leading in different contexts. And so it's a huge confidence builder, folks. If you don't underestimate the value of supporting somebody, if you take a step back and look at your own life and the moments when you felt supported versus not supported and what it did for you on your journey, it's huge. It plays a massive role, and that support, it needs to be external and outward, not just an internal thought. If John and Raj on this call, had the thought, well, we support Carrie, but they never vocalized it or extended that support in an external manner, then I wouldn't really truly know that they're supportive. So there's a difference between feeling supportive of females and actually proactively being supportive of females. Raj, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, well said, Carrie. I was thinking about this particular point, and there are several ways that men can make sure women are feeling empowered and are in fact, being empowered. The first one, Sue, you and Carrie, you guys alluded to this, the invitational questions. And this is something that I learned from Hulda Buntain. Ask questions, bring people on board, and especially those whose voices are not being represented. So my wife, Erica, Sue, would resonate with you. She's very super assertive, but we are in a home. So I live in a home with 5 women. And one of the ways, we empower our girls is around the dinner table. We have really great conversation. I'm constantly asking questions. What do you guys think? What's going on? So now it's come to a point where I can't get a word in edgewise because there's just so many things going on, so much conversation going on. So often a conversation is mostly around a topic that the girl, I like to hear what's going on in their generation and their circles. But I think the invitational question is one. I'll add a few more items to that. The second thing I want to say is can we create a space in the tension? It seems like this topic always ends up being, complementarian versus egalitarian. But, instead of going to the extremes, can we create space within the tension? Can we invite people into the conversation between the two extremes? And when you think about it, the kingdom of God is in itself, but living in the tension, right? It's here and not yet. And so we are experts in living in the tension. So how can we invite people in and into the conversation and create space in the tension? The third thing I want to say, if people are serious about bringing all voices to the table, I would encourage every organization, every church, nonprofit to do an equity audit. This is a topic that's very important to our CEO, Dave Ferguson. And last year, we hired a third-party consultant to come in and take a look at all of our compensations and did a compensation review, a benefits review. And one of the things this consultant did is to do an equity audit. And if you look at the report under the equity audit, it says equity bias non-existent, which was really great. We want it to be that way. So I would encourage every organization, every church, nonprofit to do an equity audit. If you don't know of someone who can do that, if you need name information of a third-party consultant, reach out to me. I'll be happy to give you that information. And then the last thing, the fourth thing I want to say is, Dave Ferguson has this great saying from his book, Hero Maker, I see in you. Such a great principle to practice. Where are we seeing God at work in people? And I have a little twist to that. I would say, I call it empowering through prayer. So as we are having one-on-one meeting with people, especially of the gender, is when you pray for that person, call out where you see God's moving in that person. So if I'm praying with Jami, I'm going to say, God, I'm so grateful that you have blessed Jami with strategic thinking gifts and leadership gifts. I'm so grateful for her communication skills and the clarity she brings into our team. I pray that you bless her, help her gifts flourish. She's making us so much better. She's making our team better. She's making exponential better. She's helping us achieve our mission. So I'm empowering through prayer. So anytime we get an opportunity to do that, we need to jump in and get in that.
So good, Raj. It's just that simple reminder that our words and our actions matter daily for the people that we're surrounded by, that we shouldn't take any moment for granted or any opportunity for granted to be able to show our support to others. And I think that goes for both men and women, but specifically in this context for the women around us. Let's dive into number 4 under empowering. And Jon, if you could read that.
Yeah, sure thing. Empowerment increases when there are explicit, transparent pathways for women to move into leadership roles, including coaching, mentorship, and opportunities to gain experience. And then the bullet underneath that says many respondents call for churches to recognize and celebrate women leaders publicly, to normalize their presence and open more doors. So we're talking about pathways here. I'll take a shot at this first, but I already mentioned a couple of systems that we had at community. One was apprenticeship, another was leadership community. I briefly mentioned the third system. I would call it a system, which was our leadership pathway. I think that pathway being visible, known, something that we encouraged across the board in all leadership areas, provided a journey that anyone could take as they grow in their leadership from, as in our language, from apprenticeship to leader to coach or even director and finally to pastor. And, over the years, we've seen many women walk that path. We actually have a training room at one of our locations where this pathway is on the wall. I don't know if it's painted or a decal or what it is, but it's up there and it's been up there a long time. And as far as I know, it's not going anywhere. I think that leadership pathway and making that one of the systems as a part of our leadership culture has made a pretty significant difference.
Sue, do you have anything you want to add to that as somebody that I think probably has personally walked a lot of women through that same pathway that Jon was just talking about?
Sure. Yes. I would say, first of all, I walked that pathway. I started as an apprentice leader, moved into a leader, became a coach. They actually created a new category in the pipeline for me called super coach, because they had me overseeing other coaches before they moved me into director and pastor. So I walked that pipeline, even though I'm one of the founding members of the church. I'm married to the senior pastor. This is the pathway that everybody walks to move up in their level of leadership, their level of influence. That's what leaders are, right? Leaders are people of influence. So first of all, I did that. But all along the way, I invited others. I've apprenticed dozens of women and a few men along the way in each of those areas, and have watched them move from, apprentice to leader to coach to staff. We've had women move from director then even into campus pastor roles. I actually even was an interim campus pastor for a year while we were on a search. So literally that pathway worked. And I would also say this. I think for women, because we in many cases have had a late invitation to the table, I think sometimes a little bit of a scarcity mindset can set in here too, where we don't want to invite somebody else in that might bump us out of our spot that took so long, for us to get. And so I think that's one of those things, like, we have to set that aside. None of this was ever supposed to be about us, men or women. This was always supposed to be about the kingdom. And for the kingdom to flourish and for reproduction to happen, we've got to keep inviting others along to be apprenticed, to take that next step on their own leadership journey. And I think especially for women to know, like, hey, the sky's the limit here. Or like we've talked about before, being clear, what are the limits?
That's good. Jon, did you want to add anything else to that?
No, I mean, I can just think of other examples. Some of you might know Tammy Melchine. She started at Community and walked that same path. And, Tammy was an apprentice. Well, actually came on staff as a children's director, and then moved into a variety of different roles, was eventually a campus pastor, and now leads our teaching team. And shameless plug, she has a new book coming out called Choosing the Opposite. If I could say, somebody mentioned they wanted to know books written by females. It's going to be a great book on the Sermon on the Mount. But Tammy's another great example. It leads our teaching team. I think of a female that walked that leadership path.
That's good. Thank you, Jon. We're not going to read number 5 that's listed here on the screen. But here's what I'm going to say about number 5. It touches on the viewpoints of egalitarian and complementarianism and the women who took the survey and the differences between how they feel empowered. One thing that I'll say is that clarity is kindness, ladies and gentlemen. And so in your own context, do the men and women on your staff know where you stand when it comes to your theological stance around men and women? Making sure that they know and that they understand. I think so often we assume that men and women know where the line is, but if it's never discussed, if it's never vocalized, if it's never shared, women will have the tendency to assume that their glass ceiling is lower than what it actually is. And they will never push through it. There's probably 2% or 3%, and I'd say Jamie, Sue, and I are the 3%, right? But there are 97% of women who will never try to break through what they sense as a glass ceiling that may or may not even exist in your context. And so clarity is kindness, and making sure that you communicate where you stand theologically on what women can and can't do and what men can and can't do is very, very important. Raj, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, while you were talking, Carrie, I was thinking of how several years ago, a bunch of us pastors here in the Washington, D.C. area, we gathered to talk about this very topic because we live in an area of high professionals. This whole the place where our church was at, the average household income is 2.5 times the national average. Home prices are crazy. And so we have a lot of professionals here, both men and women. And so the conversation was around how do we equip and empower everybody in our church? And what was interesting was when we got together over several lunches over a period of months, They were complementarian, egalitarian, and all over the spectrum. Pastors from all kinds of background. But we came to this exact same point. It's like we need clarity. And some churches decided to have a white paper on it. Some churches decided to make sure they had specific outlines for each levels of leadership and positions where men and women could serve. And that was helpful in engaging. I mean, we have to realize if we don't bring clarity, we are leaving out 50% of the population. That's a large number of people to leave out from kingdom work. But we want to engage everybody. So anything we can do to bring clarity in those areas is huge.
Raj, and I just love the fact that folks on all sides of that issue came together, because I think too often, that we let this become like a divisive point.
Yeah.
And I think that coming together and talking about it, being in the same space at the same time, that's John 17 in action, I think. And so I think it's a great example of what we need to see more of.
And we talked about creating space in the tension. We are not here to convince each other, and
exactly.
How do we engage more people for the kingdom?
So good, guys. Thank you. There's a couple things that I just want to highlight as we wrap up from the actual survey results that really rose to the top. Andy, you can stop sharing that part of the screen. I want to highlight that number one, the emotional toll of unmet expectations or invisible ceilings is real when it comes to females, women on church staffs. It is a very, very real thing. There is an emotional toll where they are extending themselves more than the men on your staff, whether you recognize it or realize it or not. It's just a real thing. Number two, the importance of visible roles and clear next steps for women. Helping them understand that there certainly are clear next steps for them, that there are more opportunities that exist for them, whatever that looks like in your context, but also the importance of seeing themselves in those roles. You heard Jami mention, that I think it was Sue who said she was invited to maybe step into a youth ministry, youth pastor role, but there were no other females on staff. And so she immediately turned it down. So when women can't see themselves, it's very hard to actually imagine themselves in those spaces and places. Third, mentorship for male leaders is a missing piece. It is just missing. And so if you're in a context where we get it. Be cautious, be careful, do all the right things, be honoring of your wives and your husbands, absolutely. But also get creative and make it an intentional point to mentor and coach women just as much as men are being coached. Some of the important feedback that we got are around more the organic moments of mentorship that happen when a man asks another man to go to lunch, or they invite them to a speaking event with them, or hey, I'm driving to go, pick up so-and-so. Why don't you come with me? Jump in the car with me. So a lot of the times that happens man on man as far as kind of that organic relationships, and women are left just watching. And so find creative ways to invite the women along into a mentorship journey, especially if you're a man. And then number 4, have an open conversation with women and ask the hard questions. If you're not sure how the women on your staff are perceiving how women are being handled, treated, equipped, empowered, ask them. Ask them to be honest with you about these things. So I see that we have some questions and we have about 6 minutes left. So let's attempt to try and get some of these questions answered. I think we can address this one. What are some first steps that you suggest for a church to start a more formal mentorship program where our staff and pastors or leaders who would be the mentors, men and women, already have full schedules? Jon, you guys at Community have managed to create something that is very simplified, and it is actually a part of your daily routines at Community. So can you just reiterate one more time what that is?
Sure, I'll kick it off, and then Sue, if you want to just walk quickly through the 5 steps, maybe that would be helpful. It goes back to apprenticeship for us, Carrie, and Raj, what you said. We like to say The four most important and significant letters in the English alphabet are I, C, and U. And having an I, C, and U conversation where you look someone in the eye and say, you know what, you may not see this in yourself, but I believe you have what it takes to lead and influence others. That can be so empowering. And I love, Raj, what you said about prayer playing a part in that too. But if someone, if you can see that in somebody, tell them and then invite them into apprenticeship. I think these 5 steps have proved to be invaluable. So you want to walk them through that maybe in a
Yeah.
few minutes?
And I would say you're inviting them into places you're already leading. And so you're not creating another thing to do. You're just going, come with me while I lead this thing. And we use this pathway and these 5 steps in every single ministry area: kids, first impressions, students, small groups, arts. I mean, they apply across the board. And so when you're inviting somebody to apprentice, they're just coming along to see how you're leading in your space. And we use these really simple 5 steps, which I think people have probably heard before, but we're going to say them again because they work. We don't need to make it more complicated, right? Because these little quick 5 steps work. It's I do, you watch, we talk. I do it and you've been observing, and we go like, hey, how did you think that went? What do you think I got right? What do you think I missed? Then the next time is I do, you help, we talk. And then the next time is you do, I help, we talk. And the 4th time is you do. And what I skipped, John? I skipped something. I do it or you do it and I watch and we talk. So I'm not doing any of it. And then the 5th step is you do it and somebody else watches, because now you've invited somebody else to apprentice with you. So it's not creating more per se, it's inviting somebody along the journey that you're on in your area of leadership.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, I'm reading more of the questions. We have 3 minutes left. To the conversation, how do men that invite us women into those spaces actually influence those men who are on the opposite end of the spectrum, or maybe even wonder why I may be the only woman on a Zoom call? And so I think they're referencing to the conversation about the space where, like, I found myself in a room full of 300 men and I was the only woman. Actually, there were 2 of us in the room, or the Zoom calls where, like, there's 1 out of 12. And they're specifically asking, how do the men in those spaces that are cheering on the women or invited those women into those spaces influence the other men in those spaces? John and Raj, you guys want to try to tackle that one?
I think, I think again, the invitation into the conversation. And I had a whole different thought that went through my mind as I was listening to that conversation, Carrie, and I'm just going to go ahead and say, you don't become more of a Christian by becoming less of a woman, or you don't become more of a Christian by becoming less Indian, less American. God created each person to be who they are. And so flourishing in your gifts, I think is a critical thing to keep in mind. I think in those kind of conversations where, like, if I were to invite a woman into an environment where there's 98% of the audience is men, wanting to make sure that those women are being invited into the conversation, that they are not being, even inadvertently being excluded in any way.
Yeah, I think what Raj said is spot on. And in our contexts, we recognize that we're bringing groups together like that, and there are women in the room. We're not here to debate theology. That's not what this is about. This is, for example, like if it's a church multiplication network, we're about planting new churches. Let's do that together. And so we're clear about what we're about. Now, we can have those conversations, but not in that space and in that time. And so we're clear about what we're about during this space and expect everybody to respect each other's theological convictions.
That's so good, guys. We have 1 minute left. I'm sorry that we can't get to every question. We are going to try to put together like a resource guide that will go out, I don't know at what point, but that's just kind of a cheat sheet of some of the solutions that we've discussed here today. So keep an eye out for that. Maybe we'll send that out maybe next weekish. I don't know. We'll figure that part out. But I wanted to say thank you for joining us. And this is an important conversation for the church. And I specifically want to talk to the women who are listening. I pray that you would be encouraged and not discouraged by this conversation, recognizing that God is moving on your behalf to ensure that you would walk in the fullness that he's created you for in the context of whatever church you're planted in. And
Amen.
so just know that the Exponential staff, we are here cheering you on. You are not alone in this, and keep going. Don't stop. And as I would often say, find somebody that you would trust, that if you ever feel like quitting or giving up, that you can go to and have that conversation and let them talk you out of it, because we need you on the front lines. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our speakers here, our giant panel of amazing, wise folks who have been on church staffs, empowering and equipping women along the way over the years. And we appreciate you being with us. Thanks so much.